Okay, so get this right. Today, we're diving into something pretty wild. The overlap between autism and dementia.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing. When you first hear it, those two don't seem like they'd have much in common, right?
Right, like at first glance, they seem worlds apart.
Yeah.
But the stuff you sent over from Cheap ABA,
Hmm.
these folks who focus on autism resources,
Hmm.
it really highlights some surprising links.
Yeah, it is pretty fascinating. It's like this idea that two conditions that we often see as being on opposite ends of the human experience could actually have this shared ground. It's pretty wild, honestly.
For sure. So to make sure everyone's on the same page, let's start with the basics. When we say autism spectrum disorder, what are the key things to keep in mind?
So that spectrum part of ASD, that's huge because it reminds us this isn't one size fits all, right? We're talking about a whole range of neurological differences. And these differences, they impact how someone experiences the world, like everything from their social interactions to how they communicate to their sensory processing, their behavior patterns. It's a lot.
And like Cheap ABA points out, this can look really different from person to person. Like you could have one person who thrives on routine, like really needs that structure, but struggles big time with social cues. Then you've got someone else who's super passionate about like one specific topic, but they have a hard time actually like saying how they feel.
Exactly. You nailed it. And then on the, well, not really the other side, but we have dementia, which is about this decline in cognitive abilities. So memory, thinking, judgment, it all takes a hit and it gets severe enough to really impact daily life.
And Alzheimer's is the most common form of that, yeah.
You got it. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. When you look closer, there are these like unexpected similarities between autism and dementia. Cheap ABA really highlights those challenges with social interactions like a common thread.
Yeah, that really jumped out at me too. But I'm guessing those social challenges, they probably come from totally different places, right? Depending on which condition we're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. You're spot on. So with autism, it could be like difficulty interpreting social cues, or maybe expressing themselves in a way that others understand easily. But with dementia, those social changes are often because of memory loss, like forgetting familiar faces or struggling to follow a conversation.
It's like they're navigating the same maze,
Yeah.
but with totally different maps or something. And it's not just the social stuff, right? I know Cheap ABA also talked about emotional regulation being a shared hurdle.
Yeah, definitely. And this can look like increased anxiety or even meltdowns in some autistic individuals or even, agitation and outbursts in folks with dementia.
Okay, so we've got these overlaps, which is super interesting, but I'm guessing the differences are just as important, especially when you think about like diagnosis and how we care for people, right?
You're hitting the nail on the head. That's where we got to like shift gears and really unpack those crucial distinctions. And honestly, probably the most basic difference is how they start, like when and how each condition actually shows up.
Because autism is neurodevelopmental, right? So
Hmm.
it's there from childhood and it shapes how a person learns and interacts with the world.
Exactly. But dementia, that usually pops up later in life. It's often like a decline from how someone used to function.
So it's like with autism, you're talking about supporting someone throughout their life,
Yeah.
helping them navigate in a way that works for them. But with dementia, it's more about managing the symptoms, maybe slowing things down if you can, and really making sure they have a good quality of life as things change.
Yeah, exactly. And that difference, like how each condition progresses, that's another biggie. See, autism isn't degenerative. It's not about like getting worse over time.
In fact, I've heard that with the right support, autistic people can adapt and have amazing lives.
Oh, totally. But dementia, there's often this element of loss, as those cognitive abilities decline. It's rough, not gonna lie.
Which makes this next part even more like, whoa, right. Because Cheap ABA is saying that, yeah, autism itself doesn't get worse with age, but autistic people might actually be more likely to develop dementia later on. Kind of blows your mind a little, yeah.
It really does, and researchers are like scrambling to figure out why. One thing from cheap ABA that like jumped out at me was about how fast memory declines. It seems like for some autistic folks, their memory might decline faster as they get older, especially in middle age.
So like their memory clock is moving faster. That is concerning. What else are they finding?
Well, genetics seem to be playing a part too. There's this gene, APOE4, that's known to up the risk of Alzheimer's, right? And guess what? It's more common in autistic adults.
Okay, so you've got this potential double whammy, right? Faster memory decline and this genetic predisposition. That's a lot. And I bet that makes it super important to catch any early signs, right?
Absolutely. And this is where those overlapping symptoms we talked about, they get really tricky. Imagine someone with autism who already has a tough time with social stuff or managing their emotions. Now, picture those things getting more intense or changing in subtle ways.
It'd be so hard to tell what's going on. Is this just part of their autism, or is it like a warning sign of something more?
Exactly. It's this huge puzzle for doctors to figure out. Early diagnosis for both conditions, it's so crucial. But it takes a ton of expertise, you know? You got to understand autism and dementia really well. We need doctors to be more aware of this, more research into those early signs, especially for autistic people. Maybe even new diagnostic tools, ones that can really tell the difference.
So it's like a whole new frontier, especially because if you get the diagnosis wrong, or if you miss that chance for early intervention, that could be huge, right?
You said it. Getting the diagnosis right and getting it early is everything.
So say someone's listening and they're a little freaked now, maybe for themselves, maybe for someone they love. Where do they even begin with all this?
Yeah. Honestly, knowledge is power, right? Cheap ABA, they really emphasize finding good resources for info and for support. Like for folks on the spectrum, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, that's a great starting point. And with dementia, the Alzheimer's Association, they're amazing. Tons of info and support there.
And of course, talk to a doctor. Like, don't hesitate. Even if it's just to rule something out, that early intervention, it can make a world of difference for both of these.
Couldn't agree more. And, this brings us back to something really important: lifelong support for people with autism. That support might look different as they grow older, but it's gotta be there and it's gotta adapt.
This potential link to dementia, it makes that idea of lifelong support even more urgent.
Totally. We need a more holistic approach to healthcare, one that gets that neurodivergent people have unique needs and we gotta support them throughout their lives.
We need a system that sees the whole person, you know,
Hmm.
from childhood through adulthood. And that system needs to be ready to provide the right kind of support at every stage. It's like we're moving away from just reacting to these conditions and moving towards preventing them,
Mm.
especially now that we know about this possible link between autism and dementia.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes this whole conversation so important. By shining a light on this unexpected connection, we're not just pointing out potential problems, we're also opening up these new possibilities for early intervention, for better support systems, maybe even for ways to prevent it down the line.
It just shows how much we still don't get about the brain and how much more there is to learn.
Totally. And that's where, Cheap ABA points out these really cool areas for more research. Like they talk about how certain therapies and lifestyle changes might actually lower the risk of cognitive decline, especially for people on the spectrum. Stuff like cognitive stimulation therapy, music therapy, even just changing your diet. Like imagine if we could find some breakthroughs in those areas.
It's almost like we're about to understand brain health in a totally new way, a way that finally gets to the needs of neurodivergent people.
That's a great way to put it. We're moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach to healthcare and finally recognizing that personalized care that actually affirms neurodiversity, that's the future. And that shift, that has the power to change everything, not just for folks with autism and dementia, but for everyone, really.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. We've explored those fascinating connections between autism and dementia, uncovered potential risks, and talked about how important early intervention, ongoing support, and a more holistic approach to care really are.
It all comes back to awareness, doesn't it? The more we know about these things, the better we can advocate for ourselves and the people we love, and the better we can push for systems that are actually inclusive and supportive for everyone.
And to our listeners, we hope this has made you curious and given you some valuable insights. Remember, knowledge is the first step to understanding, to empathy, and to taking action. So keep those brains engaged and keep asking those important questions. We'll see you next time.